Hello everyone, welcome to my Resident Evil 2 Remake, Hardcore difficulty, Claire 1 scenario, no damage, knife only, S plus walkthrough, and this is the sewer area. And this is a pretty short level, and it's overall very simple. I mean, the only part that's probably going to cause you a lot of trouble is the G-Adult room, because that room, it's kinda random with what the G-Adults are going to do, and this is really the only part of the game where we actually encounter the G-Adults. Overall, I'd say the G-Adults are a very forgettable enemy. I always forget they're in the game. I'm always so hesitant when it comes to listing them as an enemy type because I have to exert a little bit more effort when it comes to remembering that they're in the game. And even if I did remember them, I would still call them a pretty crap enemy. Because they have some pretty bad hitboxes on their attacks, and they have the ability to recover from counterattacks when they grab you so quickly. So they can just immediately grab you before you even have a chance to run past them. And I don't know why this is the case with this particular enemy, but it's just completely bullcrap. But right here, this is so odd. I don't know what the developers were expecting you to do for a knife-only run, but there's literally no way to get past these two zombies without doing the method you're going to see me do. So what I'm going to do is when he gets up to the top of the staircase, I'm going to wait for him to lose me, and then I'm just going to sneak behind him, because for that particular doorway, he's very slow to respond to you when you go back into the room. And right there, I did mess it up a little bit because I was too slow. But when you touch him, or when you just run past him, he doesn't seem to respond to you that quickly, which is so odd. And right here, I'm trying to chop off this guy's legs, but it fails. Because when they fall into the water, they kind of change position, so the spot you were expecting them to land in is not the actual spot they're going to land. They kind of move a little bit further. And the reason why I was trying to attack that zombie from where I was is because when you turn the zombie into a crawler and they fall into the water, they will always die. And this is important to note because in games like Resident Evil 6 and Resident Evil Revelations 2, the enemies could actually survive in the water. They could actually move in the water, but thankfully that is not the case in this game. So a great strategy to use if you're getting screwed a lot by zombies is to turn them into a crawler and then have them fall into the water. And because of how awkward the zombies' behavior is on this game, they oftentimes just stay on the ledge before they actually decide to go down into the water. It's so bizarre. And right here, I'm using stealth against the enemies because if you walk, you will not be able to alert the enemies. And the reason why I do this is because this guy is completely random as to how long he takes to break down the door. Sometimes he is very quick to break down the door, other times he takes quite a while to do so. So I don't want to run the RNG factor of getting those other zombies alerted. So that's why I use stealth. And the stealth aspect is a pretty cool idea. The fact that you can use stealth against other enemy types aside from lickers is really beneficial. But there's the guy that I would have been able to kill had I taken off his leg. But sadly I was not able to do that. And that guy, he's just walking into a wall. And the zombie pathing on this game is so bizarre. I don't really understand how I can be afraid of these zombies when their pathfinding is as atrocious as it is. The amount of times they walk into walls, the amount of times they can't even walk in a straight line. Freaking drunk zombie. I don't remember any drunk zombies from games like Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6, and also 7. I mean, there were a couple moments where enemies would run in a circle, but those were kind of rare, and they only ever happened if you stayed in an area for too long, or if you stood in a spot where the enemies were going to mess up. But it happens so frequently on this game, and I don't know if that is intentional, because Capcom did say that they were trying to make this game speedrunner-friendly, but when they say speedrunner-friendly, I'm just confused as to what Capcom means. And that's why I assume that this pathfinding issue for the enemies is intentional to benefit the speedrunning aspect, because if you notice that in the older Resident Evil games, the zombies in those games behaved very similarly, where their pathfinding was really bad. So, that's why I'm assuming it's intentional. But right there, this second G-Adult, it's very random. It's kind of random what he does. You don't know what move he's going to do. So I instead just try to go around him, but he ends up grabbing me. But because I already have a broken knife, I just use the counterattack on him. And thankfully, since I'm not having to run past him, I don't have to run the gambit with him having to recover from his animation so quickly. So I got past him. And of course, that third G-Adult, he takes a while trying to get out of there. So I'm just going to run past him. And now we're inside of here. I'm going to grab the Queen plug over here. And then I'm going to grab the King plug. The B scenario, or the second run in this game's case, is different in this section. In that room where the G-Adults were, they're actually zombies. There are two zombies. One of them is just crawling around on the ground before I actually drop into that room. And then the second one is in the water where that third G-Adult was. And it doesn't really change up the difficulty that much, but in this room here, they do add one additional zombie, and he can be kind of annoying because his pathing is very awkward, and if he does something very awkward, then he's going to potentially screw you over. But I think as long as you know how to use the sprint counter against him, you'll be fine. And as long as you're not walking towards him at some weird angle, because the zombies gain a lot of range on their grabs whenever they're trying to attack you if you're at an angle. So for instance, if you're at their side, or if you're behind them, the zombies seem to have additional range on their grabs. And this is the same case with the Ivies. The Ivies are incredibly dangerous whenever you're behind them, because they gain so much range on their attacks. And this happens so much whenever I'm trying to get to the final Tyrant on Leon's campaign. The amount of times I have been grabbed by an Ivy in that section is a lot. So we're now backtracking out of this room, and backtracking out of this room is a lot easier than getting into this room, because there's less RNG to deal with when it comes to the G-Adults. And the G-Adults have different kinds of attacks. They have the ability to emerge out of water, and it does make you flinch if you're near them. Not in this case. That guy there, for some reason, when he emerges out of the water after doing that pre-programmed attack, he never seems to make you flinch. And they also have the ability to summon G-Embryos, where they open their head entirely and spit out these G-Embryos that will attack you while you're in the water. But the best way to avoid that attack is to just hug the right-hand side and run past them, because they always have trouble hitting you if you time it correctly. They also have an overhead slam. The overhead slam is pretty easy to see, but it has some pretty bad hitboxes. Like, their head is actually a weapon in that attack, which is so bizarre. Another attack that the G-Adults can do is a double horizontal strike. You can easily see that coming, so it's not a problem, and they do have a lot of recovery during that animation, so you can run past them. And then the final attack that the G-Adults have is a grab move, and the grab is crazy. They can grab you at some ridiculous angles. Like, even if you're on their side, they can still grab you. The grab just covers that much of an angle. It's preposterous just how ridiculous their grab is. But once you learn these moves, the G-Adults are pretty simple to understand. You just gotta understand their hitbox issues, you gotta understand the angles they can grab you at, you have to understand how to interpret their animations correctly, and they're fairly simple. But we have now gained access to G2 Birkin, and something I want to point out, do you notice how Claire has her flashlight out? Well, for some unknown reason, whenever the characters have their flashlights out, they take even longer to pull out their knives. So, in a knife-only run, it is so hard to readjust your character by aiming, because it takes so long to pull out their knife. This is not the case when you're in the water for some reason. When the characters have their flashlights out and they're in the water, they have no kind of delay whatsoever when it comes to pulling out their knives. And you might be thinking, this doesn't seem like a big issue. Well, it is. Because of how squirrely and loose the movement on this game is, you need that kind of control to make sure your character isn't doing any kind of movement that you don't want. And this is especially important if you need to, say for instance, do the sprint counter, or you need to dodge enemy attacks. When the characters have their flashlights out, doing the sprint counter or trying to dodge an enemy attack is way harder than it perhaps should be, because you don't have that level of control when you're trying to control what the characters do movement-wise. However, this particular situation doesn't apply when you have your gun out, though. When you have your gun out, there's no kind of delay whatsoever, regardless of whether you had your flashlight out or not. Why is this not the same case with the knife? It's so unfair and so dumb. I really don't like it. But thankfully we're not going to deal with it in this boss fight, because Claire doesn't have her flashlight out. And this is G2 Birkin. So at the beginning, he's going to always do a charge attack. If you hug the left-hand side, he will do his charge attack early. If you don't, he will do the charge attack when you're trying to mantle down. And this is a problem because it puts him in a very unfavorable position that you do not want. Now that we're down here, you've got to hit the crane, and then you've got to pick up the knife over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the sprint counter against G2 Birkin, because he is susceptible to it, and I'm going to watch exactly what he does. I'm waiting for the crane to reset right now, but once the crane resets, I'm going to go over to where the switch is, and I'm going to use the sprint counter to bait out an attack animation that gives him a lot of recovery frames. Like this attack right here. This 3-8 combo gives him a lot of recovery frames, and if you press the button at just the right moment, at just the right time during his recovery frames, he will always do this attack animation right here, and it is so fair because you can easily avoid it by just running. And that is the end of the first phase. Now, every time G2 Birkin gets hit by the crane, he has to climb up, but while he's climbing up, you need to get behind him so that he does this attack. By doing this attack, you're delaying him. But right there, I stood in the wrong spot. By standing in that spot where I was just then, it's forcing G2 Birkin to close the distance to me very early, so I'm having to run away from him, and running away from G2 Birkin is very dangerous because he always has a tendency to do the jump attack when you're running away from him. And if he does the jump attack when you're running away from him, it's very hard to predict, and he can easily hit you. But I'm repeating the same strategy again. I'm going to try to bait out an attack animation that gives him a lot of recovery frames. The moment he completes this animation, I'm going to press the button. But that was a mistiming, because he just got out of his recovery frames when I pressed the button. So he's going to do the moves I don't want. But thankfully I managed to lure him over to that spot on the arena, and he got hit by the crane. And this is where I realized my error, so I'm going to stand right behind him, and I'm going to stand right over here. Because by standing in that spot over there, it's going to force him to take the path he does right there, where I'm getting a lot of distance from him, and I can use the sprint counter to my advantage. In the last phase, he does this 5-hit combo, which is especially dangerous if he's very close to you, because it's almost impossible to avoid that combo if he's very close to you when he does it. And I get a really good pattern here, because he keeps doing this combo every time I do the sprint counter. And by the way, that flinch animation you're seeing me do right now, that's not actual damage. It's just something that G2 Birkin does if you touch him during any of his attack animations at a weird spot. But he's doing the animation again, and this is perfect, because he has so much recovery frames on that particular animation. And he's going to do the move I need, and the fight is practically over. G2 Birkin is definitely one of my favorite bosses on this game. And I just don't find him to be as awkward as some of the other bosses. I mean, G2 Birkin, G4 Birkin, and Final Tyrant are probably my favorite fights in this game. And for G2 Birkin in particular, he doesn't have the level of awkwardness that G1 Birkin does, and he doesn't feel so dragged out like G3 Birkin does. And speaking of G3 Birkin, G3 Birkin is definitely my least favorite fight on the game, because the fight drags out way longer than it perhaps should. He has a lot of really bad hitboxes on his attacks, and playing as Leon is worse than playing as Claire when it comes to fighting G3 Birkin, and it's so baffling that Capcom decided to make that a thing. And if you're wondering what I mean, Claire and Leon knife differently on this game. Claire knifes upward, while Leon knifes downward. There's one particular eyeball that G3 Birkin has that is on his back that is so easy to hit when you're playing as Claire, because of the fact that she knifes upward. As Leon, it's almost impossible to replicate the kind of strategy you would do when you're playing as Claire, because he knifes downward. So you have to resort to this very awkward strategy of getting him to be in a particular recovery animation, and then knifing him at some weird angle so that you can bypass his skin, because his skin is blocking his eyeball when you're doing this strategy as Leon. And you're running the risk of not being able to hit the eyeball correctly because of that. And you're running the risk of your knife breaking so quickly because of how awkward that is. It's so dumb, it really is. I don't know why Capcom didn't rework Leon's knife attack animation. It's so ironic because Leon is supposed to be the master of knives in the Resident Evil series, but on this game, he underperforms so much. And I know Leon's low attack with the knife is very beneficial for hitting zombie legs, or for hitting lickers, or for hitting anything that's on the ground, but you're never put into a position where you need to do that. The only time you're ever put into a position like that is if you're playing the game poorly. That's literally it. If you're being put into a position where you're forced to deal with the enemies like that, you're playing the game all wrong. Unless you're doing a kill-all run. And doing a kill-all run of this game is pretty boring. I did a kill-all run of Leon A, and I tried to do a kill-all run of Claire A, but it was just so boring. Such a run made an already underwhelming game even more underwhelming than it already was. And it was just such a really boring experience for me that I just completely deleted my live stream of Claire A doing a kill-all run of it. But all I'll say, though, is that Leon is inferior to Claire, in my opinion. I mean, he might have the better weapons, but as I've already mentioned, a lot of the weapons on this game are completely pointless because the game is just designed around knife only. So, if the game is designed around knife only, and you're only considering the knifing capabilities of the characters, Claire is so much better than Leon when it comes to knifing. And that doesn't make any sense in the slightest whatsoever, because Leon is supposed to be the master of knives. Knives are supposed to be his preference. This is something that's been established in the Resident Evil games. But this game, I just don't see that in all honesty. And I know I'm pissing off a lot of people by bad-mouthing Resident Evil 2 Remake. In fact, my previous videos have received several dislikes. My first video got 1 dislike, my second video got 2 dislikes. I swear to God, do these people have lives? If you can't accept criticism, go to some other video. Don't waste your time trying to dislike my own video. I bet these people are like, oh, it's because you're bad at the game that you have these bad thoughts about Resident Evil 2 Remake. I'm good at this game, and I have the healthy mindset needed to judge a game the right way, and I still feel the way I do about Resident Evil 2 Remake. And when I say good at this game, I don't mean like, oh, I've just played this game longer than you have, so I know automatically what I'm doing. I'm not like Seraphim17, where he claims to understand Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6 better than I do, even though he devoted little to no time whatsoever to trying to understand those games. I have actually spent a lot of time on this game. I have been talking with my friends about this game. I have been studying the bosses. I have been studying the mechanics. I have been studying everything. Have you made the exact same effort to understand the game like I have? Because I'm gonna guess with 100% certainty that you haven't. So don't come in here and try to sway me with whatever false, subjective, or completely pointless claims you have about Resident Evil 2 Remake. If you don't have the playstyle or the mentality necessary to make such objective and factual statements about Resident Evil 2 Remake, then you're just not worth my time whatsoever. But enough of that tirade. I'm just going to conclude the commentary here. Stay tuned for the final part, which is the laboratory section. I'm going to try to do the whole entire laboratory section without making a save in the middle. That way I can get the S+ rank. And that'll be quite an experience, let me tell you. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.